What's up everybody, this is LaughNapkin back with another video from one of my favorite subreddits, r/MaliciousCompliance. Our first story is, the policy is absolutely no overtime without 48 hours advance approval. Got it? I do now. This story is a triple play. It's a long and satisfying story of corporate malicious compliance. And after that, we have our first comment story of the day from a YouTuber named AJAKUK1, and it's called Entitled Kid is a Bully. If you want to feature one of your stories, then go ahead and post it in the comment section below. Now do me a favor and hit that thumbs up, and if you're new here, smash that subscribe button and let's get into it. The policy is absolutely no overtime without 48 hours advance approval. Got it? I do now. This happened a long time ago. It was my first job after getting out of the military. The company I worked for was very cheap. They got all their work by being the lowest bidder, and they did everything they could to pinch pennies. Most importantly, there was also a no overtime rule, which I quickly found out was strictly enforced. To be able to do any overtime, you had to get approval at least 48 hours in advance. If you got even 15 minutes of overtime, the smallest increment possible, they would make you take off 15 minutes early the very next day to make sure they didn't have to pay you any overtime. And at the rates I was making in those days, 15 minutes equated to less than $2. In those very few times I didn't get clocked out in time, my boss would give me a lecture the next day. He left at 4, I worked until 7. Then he'd make me take off 15 minutes early to erase the overtime. Each time he would ask me why, and I would explain, which was always something understandable and justifiable. I'd still get the lecture about overtime requiring 48 hours of approval prior to the overtime and a warning that if I did it again, I just wouldn't get paid for it. Fine, I get it. You don't want me to get overtime. No problem. It also seemed to be lost on him that every time we had the conversation, it would take at least 30 minutes to talk about it, so the combined waste was a whole hour to talk about 15 minutes of excess time. One of my tasks was to take down the temperature of one of the freezers they had. The thing was a huge walk-in freezer that contained a few $1,000s worth of inventory. The temperature was supposed to be under 32 degrees, or lower than that, I don't remember. But one day I saw the temperature was over 40, so I wrote it down and called the supervisor up front. He told me not to worry about it. He'd get the night crew to take a look at it, and that I should just get out of there before I get overtime. The next day, I got a lecture from the boss about the 48-hour rule and was told not to do it again. So that evening, when it was close to time for me to leave, I checked that freezer again and the temperature is up in the 40s again. I write it down in the log and call up the maintenance team. No one answers. I look at the clock. It's time for me to start heading to the exit to clock out. I think about calling up the supervisor to tell him, but as far as I can tell, no one even looked at the freezer the night before, so I said F it. If I reported it, I was going to be late and my boss was going to lecture me again. So, okay, here's your malicious compliance. I knew the potential damage, but I also knew I was going to get a lecture if I tried to do anything about it. So, have it your way. Don't want me to report it? Fine. I'm leaving for the night. The next morning, the boss calls me into his office. From there, I can see the freezer is open and they have a work crew emptying out the contents into carts, which they're taking to the dumpster. Apparently, everything or almost everything was ruined. When I get into the boss's office, he looks pissed. He's not the only one there though. There's also this safety inspector, which I thought was odd because ordinarily if there was something like this, it would be the maintenance boss. But he was out that day. I would have preferred the maintenance boss. Talking to that guy was like talking to your grandpa. The safety inspector was a bit of a character, and as such, you never knew what he was going to say in an interview like this. While my boss is trying to point fingers at me for failing to notify anyone, the safety inspector, acting as maintenance boss, points out that clearly there's enough evidence of policy in place that the process is flawed and that he should take that as an out for him and me both. They end up having this huge investigation, witch hunt, but in the end, it came down to the conclusion that I didn't do anything wrong and I was just following orders, as I'd said. So to save $2 in overtime, they let a few $1,000s worth of inventory go to waste. As far as I could tell, after I reported the problem the first time, no one said or did anything more about it, and even less the second time. Whatever was wrong with that freezer was gonna take at least 2 months to fix, for whatever reason. So they had to rent a refrigerated tractor trailer, which I was told cost them $100 a day to lease. If that's true, the mishap ended up costing them somewhere around $10,000. I don't know if the repairs and trailer rental could have been avoided, but the lost inventory definitely could have been avoided. Second malicious compliance. With the first incident behind me, or so I thought, we had someone on the early shift who quit. They needed someone to move from the afternoon shift 11 to 7 to the morning shift 4 to 12. Guess who they picked? I was told it was because I was the most junior person, but that didn't make any sense because they'd hired another person after me and she was still there. I felt like it was punishment, but at the same time, I kind of wanted to be on the morning shift, so I kept my mouth shut and took that shift as told. My popularity with the boss didn't improve any. For one thing, anytime I requested a day off, he'd reject it. At first, it was for reasons like, sorry, that's not enough notice. But I would sometimes tell him 3 or 4 months in advance, and they would always be refused. This also applied to holidays. Since we needed both shifts to work every single day, including all major holidays, not everyone could take holidays off. So I got stuck being on duty when it was a holiday, but I could bank my holiday and would be told that I could use that holiday later on a day of my own choosing, which meant never because my boss wouldn't approve them. When I got on the morning shift, we were short a man on the afternoon shift because I had gone to that morning shift. This was okay for a while. In typical corporate fashion, they didn't even post a job opening for a few weeks. So after a while, the afternoon shift was getting pretty raged from doing all the work with a man absent. Typically, what would always happen in the past was the boss would ask someone from the early shift to pull a double and work an extra 7 hours. This was pretty rare because of the no overtime rule. One day, the boss calls me into the office just before noon. He tells me I need to pull a double today. The second shift could really use the extra help. Okay, I said. As little as I made, I appreciated the overtime. But at the same time, this just made me feel used and abused, which kind of annoyed me. I couldn't take time off, not even on holidays. And as cheap as the company was, they were saving a ton of money by not hiring a third person for that shift, but would burn out the existing employees for a few extra bucks. Then I thought about it a little bit more and said, wait, I've worked 8 hours already. If I work till 7, that will give me, I counted it up on my fingers just for the dramatic effect, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 hours of overtime for the day. I'm authorizing this overtime, my boss says. Okay, I said, then turned to leave and stopped again. Wait, authorizing it as in my paycheck will reflect 7 additional hours at time and a half? Or authorizing it as in when I get here tomorrow morning, I'll work an hour and then you're gonna send me home because I'm 7 hours ahead on my time card. 7 extra hours on your paycheck, he said. At time and a half? I asked. Yes, damn it, he said. Okay, I said, then turned again, but then turned right back. Hey, wait a minute. You almost had me there. What are you talking about? My boss asked. That was pretty good, I said, wagging a finger at him. I almost fell for it too. He looked at me like I was crazy, and maybe I was. This is like some expert level Simon Says, I said. What are you on about? He asked me. You almost got me, I said. It's a trap. I looked at the wall where some of the notices were posted. Here it is. I pointed to a paper that had the no overtime rule on it. It even had my signature on it, along with the other employees. Right there. Blah, blah, blah. No overtime and 48 hours prior approval. And aha, here it is. Absolutely no exceptions. Whoa, you almost had me with that one. Could you imagine if I worked overtime? I wouldn't get paid because right now, here, today, this isn't 48 hours in advance of a few minutes from now. I smiled triumphantly at my boss and left his office and didn't do the overtime. I thought I was pretty slick. The next time it happened, my boss caught me in the hallway and said he needed me to work a double today. I nodded, then responded with, "Hey, wait a minute. Do you mean today, as in right now? You know I can't do that." I shrugged my shoulders. "You know the policy, no exceptions." He looked at me like I had two heads and walked off. I pulled this a few times on him and I felt justified in doing so. I know I was pushing it, but damn, you can't say no exceptions and then claim an exception. I figure I could have been fired over not doing it, but at the same time, I figured I could also find another job without too much difficulty. When I got moved to the morning shift, I had gotten a part-time job in the afternoons that paid enough money to make it worth my time. Also, I'd already interviewed with a few places, and with the responses I was getting, I figured I wouldn't be out of work very long if I did get fired, whether it would have been legal to fire me or not. Working the morning shift had always given me plenty of time to interview in the afternoons. So because they were pissy about me getting 15 minutes of overtime and acting like it was all my fault, no exceptions period, I threw their words back at them and refused to do the overtime because has to be a 48-hour prior approval. In the long run, I like to think I hurt them more than it hurt me. Long epilogue. Not too long after this all started, I was in my boss's office at one point and there was another department head in there, which at first didn't seem at all suspicious, but this other department head says that he has an opening and he wants me to apply for it. A possible promotion. My boss is singing my praises and says all the regular catchphrases like, "Great opportunity for you," and "Sure would hate to lose you, but," and all that. I get it. It's not lost on me that my boss thinks he can get rid of me by having me promoted into another department. He even wrote a recommendation about me to the big boss and helped me get selected as the WorkWise Employee of the Month, which was a monthly thing for safety-conscious employees. When I was selected, I got a certificate and a reserved parking spot for a month. So I applied for that other position. This other department head even reviews my application with me and helps me update my resume. So when the big boss does the interviews, I end up getting the job. The other helpful factor was that I only had a high school diploma and they normally wanted someone with a degree, which would seem to be a liability, but because of how cheap this company was, they saw this as an opportunity. "He doesn't have a degree, so we'll lowball him and he'll take it. Ha 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 ha." And that's exactly what they did, and they were right. The department head told me how much the position was supposed to pay, and the big boss offered me $2,000 below that, which was still a huge pay increase for me because of how little I was being paid already. I took the new job. It was a piece of cake. It was a Monday through Friday job. It was salaried. I no longer worked weekends. I no longer worked overtime. I no longer worked from 4 to noon. After I took the job, I would run into my boss from time to time and he had this attitude like he was happy for having gotten rid of me. I don't think he knew I got a raise, or if he did, that didn't seem to bother him. He was rid of me and he was happy about it. In my new job, I was an instructor. I was all of 23 years old and mostly unqualified. I had to apply to something called a deficiency program to meet the state requirements to do it. I had 2 sessions per day, 5 days per week. The company got paid for each person I trained in each session. From what I understand, this was decent money. I would typically have 20 students in each session. If the company was paid $50 per student, I'm guessing it was around that much, that would be $1,000 for each session, or $2,000 per day that they were making. Not bad for the company, and good for me because the position was hard to fill at what they were willing to pay, and I was below that. So everybody was a winner, except my part-time job, but that was okay. The position had even gone vacant for over a year before they asked me to fill it. Not long after I started, the department head who brought me on left and was replaced by another department head. This was a woman who everyone had already known about, and she was known for being a real hard ass who didn't take any crap, and was, at least supposedly, hard to get along with and hard to work for. I figured I wouldn't last too long with this new boss if the rumors were true, and right off, she was butting heads with several of her employees because, like any new boss, she made the changes she thought needed to be made. I didn't have any problems with her and tried not to give her any reason to have a problem with me. One time, I get called into her office and I'm wondering what it's about. She tells me how she got a call from HR about me and we needed to do some things, and fast. Not long before this, there had been kind of a big story in the news about a nearby city where the police and fire departments, not at all related to our work, had to pay out retirees some huge amounts of money for vacations and holidays they'd been banking over the years. The punchline of this news story was how some fire chief had over a year of vacation saved up, some of it dating back to when he was a rookie. Now the city had to pay him his current wage for a benefit that was only a few bucks when it was earned, but now was worth a whole lot more. The boss lady tells me how HR is concerned that this is what I was trying to do. Save up vacation time and holiday time that I earn at a low rate and then cash it in years later at a much higher rate. The idea never crossed my mind. For one thing, I didn't plan to stick around for that long. Then I got to thinking about it. In my old position, they didn't like to let me take vacation and kept me from taking holidays. My request never even made it to HR or payroll or anywhere else. So it looked like I just didn't like taking vacation because my previous boss wouldn't even process my requests. By this time, I had banked 3 weeks of vacation and about as much in holidays, so about 6 weeks of time, all earned at my previous rate, but that I would get to take at my new higher rate. So the boss lady tells me she needs me to come up with a plan for how I intend to get rid of my vacation holiday time in a reasonable manner. I came up with a plan where I would take every Friday off for the next however many weeks it took to get me down to whatever was acceptable for her or HR or whomever. When I told her of my plan, she laughed and said something like, "I guess you just want to work part-time from now on, don't you?" When I smiled, she tells me, "Wow, I didn't even know you had teeth." I told her I didn't know what she meant. She told me she'd never seen me smile before, which made me realize I was way too serious around her, expecting her to be serious and that those rumors about her were unfounded. She was just a no BS kind of person. Before I ran out of vacation and holiday time, I decided I was gonna quit that crappy job to do something else. I still had something like 3 weeks worth of time off to use up, so I figured based on company policy that I would just put in my notice, continue to work, and then get a big fat check at the end of it all, like a severance. My boss was always straight with me, so I told her my plan, even though I knew this might put me in jeopardy of being told my services were no longer needed and I'd be out of job earlier than I planned. The boss lady told me she appreciated me telling her, partly because of how difficult it would be to find someone qualified, cheap enough to replace me. When I put in my official notice, I got called down to HR again. The HR lady acted like she always did, like I was trying to get one over on everyone. She tells me there's no way in hell I'm working up until the last day of my employment because that would mean the company would have to pay my salary for that time and pay me out for my vacation holiday time. She tells me instead, what they're gonna do is have me work every day until I hit the point where I have an equal number of vacation days and work days left, and then I was just going on vacation until my final day. That way, they don't have to pay me out when I leave. I point out to her that this means I would be leaving 3 weeks early. And if they didn't replace me, that means the company would lose the revenues they would have generated by having me continue to work. And those revenues would more than offset the amount they were paying me, probably by a 10-to-1 margin. She's not buying it. She tells me if I don't like it, I can go talk to the big boss. I give it some thought and realize I could either take it her way and get 3 weeks off and quit working in this crappy place 3 weeks early, or I could go try to convince the big boss that I could do better to make the company a whole lot of money. The deciding factor was realizing that all I would be doing was helping someone who had screwed me out of $2,000 because he knew I had no bargaining power in his contract of adhesion. So I said, F it, let's do it your way. She tells me that I have to withdraw my form and submit a new one saying I'm requesting to take vacation during that time. I tell her no. She asks me why not. I tell her it's because I've made my request and I'm not going to do her job for her. If she rejects my request, there's the form. She can write on there that she's rejecting it and put down what she wants her official response to be. This makes her mad, but it makes me happy. I really didn't care. I would have written the request, but I was annoyed by it all. I did the rough math on some of this. This was a company that refused to supply basic things like pens and paper and also didn't want me to even get $2 in overtime. They didn't want me to get any vacation or holidays and made me bank them. Then they decided, hey, wait a minute, I think this guy is trying to stiff us. So they were forcing me to take my built-up balance of holiday vacation time, but at the same time, every day I took off meant the loss of revenues of at least $2,000, which was way far in excess of anything I could ever make in wages at this place. Then when I said I would just continue to work and earn them money, but that they would have to pay me for my vacation time, they shot themselves in the foot by telling me I had to quit work earlier and take my vacation at the end of my employment rather than working till the end and cash out. Between lost inventory, additional wages, and lost revenues, their penny pinching must have cost them $60,000 just in trying to keep me from earning money. Entitled kid is a bully. I'd like to start by saying I'm in my 40s now, and this happened in the 80s when I was 9. As this happened a million years ago, this memory has been talked about from myself and my mother. At the time, my parents had just gone through a divorce. It wasn't the best of times for my whole family. Anyways, on to the participants. Me, at the time a very skinny, weak girl, and was age 9. My sister, at the time a 3-year-old toddler. My dad, he is so cool. My mom takes no crap from anyone. Entitled kid, the nastiest 11-year-old boy I've ever met. Entitled mother, I'll just say Karen and leave it there. My nan, she rocks. Even still now going into her 90s and still working. Okay, so like I said, my family had split and we lived with our mom. As with any split families, the other one may find another partner, which happened with my dad. The first time meeting entitled mother and entitled kid, we seemed to get along fine. My sister and myself would go to see my dad at entitled mom's house. This was brilliant for a few months, then things changed. Entitled kid started out with small things like tripping either me or my baby sister. When he seen this made us upset, he would up his ante. He loved to punch or kick. Any opportunities he got, he would do this, but never on our face. The entitled kid would threaten us that if we told on him, things would get much worse. I was scared of this kid. One weekend, we were all sent off to play on the tire swing outside. He was kicking me, but I refused to cry. My sister was with my dad watching TV, so he couldn't get to her. Then he had the brilliant idea of dragging me through dog poop, and while I was on the floor, he started hitting me with the swing. This time, it did cause a mark on my face. He spoke for me to say that I fell off the swing. At this point, I want to make it clear, at the time, this kid had convinced me if I told anyone, no one would believe me. The next time he really hurt my sister, I had enough. I spoke to my mom, who in turn told my dad. The entitled mom said to my dad words along the lines of, "Entitled kid would never do anything like that. Your children are wrong." Before the next time we went, my mom sat me down and I told her everything. Knowing I wasn't being believed by entitled mom, this woman was very convincing. So my mom hatched a plan with me. "Mom, the next time he does anything to you or your sister, I want you to grab him by the hair and shake." Like I said, I was a skinny kid. I was scared, but I was also sick of being hurt and seeing my sister hurt. The next weekend we went. Entitled kid was on his best behavior, as my dad wouldn't leave us with him alone. Only on the following Sunday, we were all eating and entitled mom went to wash her hands and shouted at my dad through the kitchen. Entitled kid took this opportunity to spit in my sister's dinner and kick her in the leg. It was at this point entitled kid knew he screwed up. I launched over the table, grabbing this kid by the hair and ragging him. The little git was screaming months of pain and hurt for not just me, my sister too. It must have lasted seconds, but felt like hours, and it felt good. At this point, the entitled mom came in and seen I had her son by the hair and proceeded to knock me off my feet with a smack. My dad hit the roof. Told entitled mom it was over and we walked out. You would think this was over. You would be wrong. A few days later, there was a knock at the door and it was my nan, my dad's mother, who always got on well with my mom. She had taken a bus from where she lived 200 miles away and came to us. My nan was fuming. After sitting down with us and having a cup of tea, she calls a taxi to entitled mom's house. All I know is my 4'5" Scottish nan had done the same thing to entitled mom as she did to me. Wow, the 80s, man. We never seen entitled kid or entitled mom ever again. You may ask, why did our dad take us back to this woman's house? To be honest, I don't know. Thank you so much for watching my video. I really enjoyed making it. Don't forget to tell me what you think about these stories and submit your own story in the comment section below. See you guys in the next video.